The conservative knows and understands the Constitution of the United States. It's more than just our handshake. It is. It's more than just a document that tells us how our government should run. It is I believe, an inspired document, a revolutionary document that was set up by men who recognize the superiority of a government of, by, and for the people over totalitarian elitist rule. And those men were learned. Those men pushed back on the monarchy of Great Britain, pushed back on the dictatorships of their day, and said, no, here in America, the people will rule. And we will create a document that will restrain government power, restrain government's ability to harm you. And since the passage of the Constitution, a political ideology which has known many names, in the United States, it's now known as the Democrat Party, but it has gone by communist, socialist, totalitarian, elitist, monarch, just affix your title to something that describes a system of government that relies on a select few to govern the masses. And also insert a style of government that takes away your individual rights and liberties. You can make money, but you can't make too much money because somebody else is going to be over your shoulder saying, oh, no, you can't make that much money. Oh, and you can't build that house. Oh, and you can't drive that car. Oh, and you can't do this and you can't do that. Oh, you can't have that kind of health care. Oh, no, you have to take this vaccine, but you can't take that vaccine. Oh, you got to take this vitamin, but you can't take that vitamin. See what I mean? That is the Constitution of the United States was designed to make sure that style of living, that, culture never devolved into the United States. But sadly, that's where we're headed under totalitarians who have taken over our government. Now, there are many solutions to restraining government, putting it back into the service of we the people. Now, one thing we could do is elect a better class of politician. Sadly, with the way our system has been perverted by the destruction of the Constitution, in particular the 17th Amendment, now we elect senators for 6-year terms, my friends. 6-year terms, and they are betrothed, they are attached at the hip to their political party, not to their state, which was out of bounds, which was not what the Founding Fathers envisioned. But guess who screwed around with the Constitution? Members of Congress. And they did so to give themselves more unchallengeable power. And that's exactly what they have done. So there are those of us out there who believe that the only way to rein in a government that has grown beyond the consent of the governed, a government now that we've seen when you get the people riled up and they want a change of government, they're going to actively undermine that government, to undermine the will of the people. You saw it with President Trump. And that's what happens when you have a bunch of entitled jerks who think that they know better than the vast majority of the American people. And they know no confines of any political party. They're on both sides of the so-called political aisle. Republicans and Democrats worked to empower this unelected branch, fourth branch of government, which was never envisioned by the Founding Fathers. These individuals who are automatically funded and get to make policy because we have substituted statesmen for cowards in the federal government, in the Congress of the United States, and in elected positions all over this country. We no longer elect statesmen. We elect cowards. So long as the cowards are in charge in Washington, D.C., there's only one remedy that many of us believe in: returning the Constitution to its former glory, returning it to the overarching only document that guides our people. And that is an Article 5 Convention of States. And basically how it works, the state legislatures propose amendments to the Constitution, in this case, to rein in a federal government that has grown beyond the consent of the governed. That's it. And how can we trust those state legislators more than we trust those in the faraway capital of Washington, D.C.? Well, it's because those people in the state legislatures are arguably closer to us. They owe their very positions to us. They can't go off to Washington, D.C. and hide from us the way guys like Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn and Kevin McCarthy and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer do. So we are going to be talking about Convention of States. Some conservatives out there are saying this is not the way to go, that the Constitution is made for a moral and just people, and they say that this country is no longer moral and no longer just. So they do not trust we, the people, to make these decisions about restraining government. And I just fundamentally disagree. I have faith in the American people. Given wisdom, given the proper information, the American people will always make the right choice. Always make the right choice. All right, that's all coming up right here on this edition of the Salcedo Storm Podcast. Okay, folks, want to get to two guests, names you know. Rick Santorum, Senior Advisor for Convention of States. Senator Santorum was a candidate for the Republican nomination for president in 2012 and 2016, winning the 2012 Iowa caucuses, 10 additional states, and nearly 4 million votes. Prior to his campaigns for president, Rick served in 2 terms in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, where he gained a reputation as one of the nation's leading government reformers, pro-life advocates, and national security experts. And our pal Mark Meckler. He is president of Convention of States Foundation and Convention of States Action, COSA. That's the first time I've ever seen that abbreviated like that. It's have 5 million supporters and activists and growing, representing every state legislative district in the country. Before COSA, Mark was the co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots. Mark has a BA from SDSU. I have a BS from SDSU, but we're not going to get into that. And a law degree from University of Pacific McGregor School of Law. He practiced law for 2 decades. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Santorum, I want to get to you first. Apparently, Senator Feingold is taking aim at both you and Mark because of your efforts with Convention of States. Detail the folks the genesis of his criticism, or maybe just tell what the criticism is, and then react to that criticism.
Well, the criticism is that there's an effort going on across the country to bypass Congress, to bypass Washington, to bypass the centers of power, to change the Constitution to limit the power of the federal government. And if you're a leftist, like my friend Russ Feingold is, this is a very dangerous thing. This is the people, storming, if you will, using the constitutional provisions to storm the Congress and strip them of their authority. And of course, he goes on to say, well, we'll lose all the Civil Rights Acts, and we'll lose, all these, Social Security, and make claims that are, unfounded and ridiculous. What we'll do is actually do what is, I think, the vast majority of Americans are concerned about, is to stop the tyrannical concentration of power in Washington, where one man, Joe Biden, can stand up and spend $1 trillion without getting one vote in Congress, and put us further in debt to pay off his political cronies. This is the kind of stuff that Americans are upset about, but this is exactly the way they want to run it. They want that power in Washington. They want it concentrated in one person, and they want them to be able to rule America. So when I see Russ Feingold out there screaming and saying Rick Santorum and Mark Meckler and Convention of States is a threat to the world that he wants to live in, I say we're finally getting over the target, and we're starting to get worried that we're actually going to get this done.
Yeah. And well, Mark, see, to me, when I hear Feingold's criticism, I think he must have a very low opinion of we, the people, because as everybody knows, our state legislators are more closely tied to, or they listen to the people because they have a closer connection to the people in the states, where the individuals in the far-off capital in Washington, D.C. can tend to be separated from the people in the states. So when Feingold says that if the Convention of States goes through and we're going to roll back civil rights, he is really saying that he believes that America is full of a bunch of racists and bad people, isn't he?
Oh, that's exactly what he's saying. And look, he and his ilk from Washington, D.C., These are what we know as the self-appointed ruling elites. They have nothing but disdain for regular Americans. I would argue, for the most part, Chris, they don't know regular people like you and me. You know, Rick and I travel all over the country. Rick's been in 12 states this year already, all over the country. I've been in 48 in the last few years. And we're always hanging out with regular folks. You know, we were in Meadville, Pennsylvania last week, Beaver, Pennsylvania, Houston, Pennsylvania, regular towns in what I call real America. Real Americans don't like people like Russ Feingold telling them what to do. And Russ Feingold and his ilk are afraid that we're going to take the power away from them.
Well, I think that's true. And that's the problem, is through the course of the existence of our Constitution, Senator Santorum, the left has been very, very patient over the last over 200 years. Almost since the passage of the Constitution, the left has been trying to undermine it because it does what Barack Hussein Obama called negative liberties. It installs negative liberties on the government, and Barack Hussein Obama and his ilk don't want any limits on what government they say can do for you. But they always neglect the flip side of the coin, is that Constitution also prevents the government from doing stuff to you. And that's what the protection is about. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, when government does things for you, they're doing it in order for you to hand over more power to them. So in a matter of time, they will start doing things to you. It's like anything else. I mean, they're just using all of the tools that are available from a dynamic, powerful, and successful economic economy in our country, and they're trying to redistribute those in order to pay off voters, just like I mentioned before, with this bailout of a large voting bloc of the Democratic Party, the folks with student loans. They're taking money from some who are not necessarily their voters, giving it to others to get them more and ingratiate them to those voters, to give them to do things for them, and then once they get power, then they'll start exercising that power to do things to them and others in society.
Right, and then of course, I don't think it was Ben Franklin. I can't remember who actually said this, but it's been attributed to Ben Franklin. But I'm quite certain it wasn't him. A government big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take everything you have. And that is a lesson throughout history that most people who study history, which seems to negate the current Congress, both political parties and the American left have neglected to do. Mark, and that brings me to a story that you told on this podcast, which got a lot of traction, which I took to the Newsmax show, about the John Birch Society / Eagle Forum type Republicans. And the kind of individual who typifies this, exemplifies this, is Mitch McConnell, who uses his sway, his influence, and his paying off of political campaigns for individuals in Kentucky on the state level to prevent them from coming to the table and drafting the ability for that state to participate in an Article 5 convention. Speak to that type of Republican that says, you know what, we love big government, we just think Republicans can administer it better.
Well, I do think that McConnell falls in that camp, and we certainly have problems directly with McConnell in Kentucky. There he influences the state caucus directly against convention of states. I think he likes having power centralized there in Washington, D.C. But I have to say that McConnell's not alone. I mean, I've not seen the Republican Party do anything in a long time, maybe in forever in my political lifetime, to take power out of Washington, D.C. and give it to the people. So this is a game that's played by politicians of both parties. It's really not partisan. And I want to be clear, I'm way closer to the Republican Party than I am to Democrat. I'm definitely a person of the right. But if you look at the history of politics in Washington, D.C., it's always about centralizing power. It's always about growing the government. Every administration, except for the Coolidge administration, every administration since Washington has grown the government in Washington, D.C. By the way, that includes the Reagan administration. And I know a lot of people really love Donald Trump, and I think he did a lot of good stuff. but he grew government astronomically. So both the parties play this game. They like power and money concentrated in D.C., and the only way we're going to take it away from them is if we take it away.
Senator Santorum is our guest right now, former senator in the United States Senate, and also Mark Meckler. He is the president of Convention of States Foundation and Convention of States Action. And Senator, as a guy who does what I do, is it possible that I should be asking questions of only Republicans talk to me, because leftists, I can't find one Democrat legislator who will actually come on and talk with me, because they don't do that. They don't talk to opposition. Should I be asking, hey, what are you proposing that is going to put power out of Washington, D.C., back in the hands of the people? Give me one initiative you are backing and proposing. Is that a fair question that any one of these individuals on Capitol Hill should be able to answer?
Absolutely. And by the way, it was a question that for a long time people could have answered. I remember when I first got to Congress 100 years ago, well, actually 30 years ago, every year I would put forth a list and send it out to the news media of bills that I introduced to cut spending or get rid of federal programs every year. And now most of them didn't go anywhere, as Mark just alluded to. We haven't done a lot of that. One did. It was called welfare reform back in 1996. But that is something I was proud of. That's what I thought I was sent to do. You won't see that anymore. You don't see that among any, maybe there's a handful of Republicans. But the reason you don't is because the news media, right and left, don't ask about it, and unfortunately, less and less voters ask about it. We've become a little fat, dumb, and happy in this country, thinking that the government actually can provide for us, and we've forgotten what made us a great country, which is self-reliance, personal and individual responsibility, and those freedoms that made us the great country we are.
Right, and you can trace that back to GovEd, which I might bring up with you guys in a different line of questioning here. But Mark, I want to bring up to the folks, because I always get this question asked about because I got an email the other day when you came on to the program. Can you ask Mr. Meckler about what the Eagle Forum says about runaway convention? The Eagle Forum says it's going to be a runaway convention if we do this. So address that while you're reminding the folks the criteria and the steps that are needed to call an Article 5 convention, the numbers, give the states numbers and what has to happen and what triggers what.
Sure. The process is contained in Article 5 of the Constitution. It says the ways we can amend. One way is through Congress. When both houses of Congress, 2/3 of both houses propose an amendment, it goes out to the states for ratification. The second way is the second clause. It says when the states want to propose amendments, if 2/3 of them propose resolutions saying they want to gather in convention, then they do that. They gather in convention, they debate, and at the end, if 26 states, a majority of states, agree on an amendment or proposed slate of amendments, those amendments go out to the states for ratification by the same measure, by 3/4 of the states. So that's the process. Currently, our effort is looking to talk about a resolution that imposes fiscal restraints on D.C., like a balanced budget amendment, imposes term limits on elected officials and other officials, by the way, in the federal government, like the deep state, the bureaucrats, the staffers, the ones that we know are doing all the bad stuff right now. And then finally, to impose scope and jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. In other words, saying, no, you may not be involved in education. No, you may not be involved in the environment or the USDA, whatever it is we decide that this should be in the states, going back to the enumerated powers. So the argument of groups like Eagle Forum and the John Birch Society, and to be fair, I think between them, I don't know what they have, 10,000 members in the whole country to our 5 million plus. But what they say is that if you gather in convention, the convention will run away. They'll propose horrible things like the repeal of the Second Amendment and the repeal of the First Amendment, and somehow 38 states are going to ratify that. And I just want your listeners to do the math in their own heads. And Rick and I have made this offer to millions of people. I'll throw it out here. Like first people say the Second Amendment, they're going to repeal the Second Amendment, right? There are 24 states today where you have constitutional carry, meaning you don't need a permit to carry your firearm in those states. Actually, 24 states as well where you can carry your handgun into the state legislature. Now, I do that wherever it's legal where I can carry my handgun. There are actually 14 states where you can carry a loaded long gun, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. I'm not saying that's a good idea. I'm just saying you can't. Right? And so what that means is if it takes 38 states to ratify, it takes only 13 states to stop something from getting ratified. Do we really believe, does anybody rational actually believe you could get 38 states to ratify an amendment to repeal the Second Amendment? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so the numbers make it so that only really mainstream proposals like a balanced budget amendment, like term limits on Congress, those are the kinds of things that can get ratified. Anything that you or I or Rick wouldn't like, it just can't get ratified.
I hear you. By the way, Senator Rick Santorum is our guest right now, former senator from Pennsylvania, and Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States Action. Senator, to you, I mentioned education earlier, and I remember learning about the Constitution. I remember learning about the Founding Fathers. Today, not only are our kids being taught that America sucks, not only are our kids being taught that America is racist, that it's okay to hate people as long as they have white color skin. Not only they be taught this LGBTQ, ABCDEFG cultural Marxism agenda, rather than, hey, you know, everybody has constitutional rights regardless of their sexual orientation or their race, color, or creed. That's not being taught. It's all radical left-wing extremism, and Americans are being forced to pay for it. Wouldn't a worthwhile curriculum, though, be Convention of States and an examination of the Constitution and why it exists?
This is one of the reasons I think the left is so concerned about this. I really think they understand that a convention called to propose amendments would probably, at least the first one of these that would be called, would probably have very minimal effect on passing amendments to control the size and scale of government. I think in this divided country, it'd be really hard, as Mark said, to get 38 states to ratify very much at all. So they can't really be that concerned that horrible right-wing things are going to happen. Here's what they're concerned about. They're concerned we're going to have a conversation. They're concerned that we're going to have a national conversation. This will be the biggest story in my lifetime. We will have a convention where we are going to have people from all 50 states come together, gavel-to-gavel coverage. There'll be groups formed around, supporting various amendments. There'll be a requirement that kids in high school and college, as well as grade school, are going to have to learn what the Constitution is, learn what separation of powers is, learn about what our constitutional freedoms are about, learn what's at stake. And that's the last thing the left wants. They don't want an educated public on what the Constitution is, how great it is, what its founding principles are. This is the big threat. Just doing this is a real threat to their power grab in Washington.
You know what? And I think that's a pretty good point, Mark. If let's just say that your efforts, and by the way, some of the way you laid it out last time to me, I see the path forward to where a convention could be called, and correct me if I'm wrong, 34 states, right? That's what we need.
That's correct. Yeah.
34 states. The discussion going on, not even CNN would be able to ignore it. Not even MSNBS would be able to ignore it. And then those in high school, the kids would be going, wait a minute, what is this all about? What is this thing? What is the Constitution you're speaking of? And many of these 8th and 9th and 10th graders would be hearing that word Constitution for the first time in their life because of the state of gov ed. And this is exactly what Democrats, socialists, leftists don't want happening. Yes?
Look, I completely agree with you. And I think Rick put it right. This would be the biggest event in modern history. I mean, it will be covered wall to wall on all the networks. It'll be in all the schools. And I wouldn't just say 8th, 9th, and 10th. I mean, this is going to be in grammar schools. It's going to be on TVs in pubs and bars across the country. It's a big deal. So look, the very worst case scenario is we end up with the largest constitutional education project in modern history. And I think that's really important. Americans need to be interested in and learn about and defend their Constitution. And so this is one way to make it happen. The other thing that's happening along the way, Chris, that's so important is that we are educating the largest self-governing grassroots army in American history. Right now, there are over 5 million people who've spoken up in support of Convention of States. We literally have volunteers in every single state legislative district in the country. We're getting ready to have our leadership summit down in Orlando. We have 600 top leaders coming in from all over the country. When I say leaders, These are people who are trained, they hold a position, they do real work every week, and they're not just involved in calling for a convention of states. They're involved in elections. We're going to be involved in over 450 elections around the country in one way or another at all levels, primarily from school board on up through the state legislature. They're involved in pro-life legislation. They're involved in election integrity and election reform legislation. They're involved in pro-Second Amendment legislation. So this army that's being built is to restore our civic sense of self-governance and the muscle that's required to maintain a self-governing nation.
Right, and maybe buttress and give that muscle that the Founding Fathers hoped our Constitution would be, to maybe reinvigorate that glue that used to hold us together, which I believe, and this is me as a conservative, this is my fundamental belief, that it has been the American left that has dissolved these bonds that made us all Americans at one point. It is my fervent belief they no longer wish to be Americans. They want to turn us into something else. And for the first time, I think they have the personnel in place, whether it be in the aforementioned deep state or permanent Washington, or certainly the cat who lives in the White House who is an empty vessel and may just usher it in so he and Jill can continue to play White House. I want you guys, if you would address, Senator, you first, the work done by the Assembly of State Legislatures. I was talking with Senator Chris Kappinga from Wisconsin for many, many moons. And here are Republicans, and it doesn't get said very much, Democrats, Republicans and Democrats coming together to adopt rules of the road for a convention and how it would all go down. And they did a lot of good, paving of the road, foundational work in that effort to allay the fears and to make this a dignified and legislative process. Can we acknowledge that?
And Rick, if you like, I'll jump in here because
why don't you do that? I'll comment on your comment. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, and Rick joined our efforts here in the last year or so. So that goes back a few years before Rick got involved.
Yeah.
So what the Assembly of State Legislatures was, it was a group of legislators from around the country that got together, and their goal was to lay the groundwork for getting to convention. They wanted to put together rules so that when we got there, everybody would know what the rules were, or at least have a suggested draft of those rules. So I would say a lot of those legislators, they're going to be remembered in history as people who did the yeoman's work that was necessary. One of the leading legislators that was in charge of that, who we still work with today, he is now Senate President in Ohio. That's Senate President Huffman, great Article 5 champion. And, one of the things that Feingold says in his book that he's so scared of is he mentions efforts like that. He mentions that we held a simulated convention in Williamsburg in 2016. And he said, look, people on the left mocked us. And they tried to pretend that it was some kind of clown show with people in tri-corner hats and white wigs. And what Feingold says is, no, look, these guys were there. They were serious. They were in business attire. These were legislators from all over the country. And that Convention of States and groups like ASL have been setting the groundwork for this for a long time, and that the left is way behind. So I got to give him kudos because there's some accurate stuff in his book. He recognizes that we're a threat to what he believes in, which is centralized control. He knows we've been preparing for a long time, and he knows we're getting close.
And Senator Santorum, when was the last time we could say that the left was behind the conservative right? It's always the Republicans / conservatives playing catch up. And on this one, it seems that there is an advantage, an initiative.
Yeah, that's what really, I sort of, in some ways, feel sorry for the folks like the John Birch Society and Eagle Forum for the position they're in, because they're so used to playing defense because all the initiatives in this country come from the left. So, of course, their knee-jerk reaction, of course, would be, well, I'm against it. And since conservatives never actually come forward with ideas and plans to make things better, we just simply respond and react to try to stop the left from doing more damage. That when the right comes out and says, hey, we've got some ideas that actually can make this country better, the knee-jerk reaction for people on the right are, no, it's a bad idea because it's new. And so because we don't do anything. And so I in some respects sympathize with them because they're always having to say no to stop something initiative on the left, and they've never seen anything from the right, so they're sort of, I think, a little dazed and confused by what we're trying to do.
Well, let me pick up on that with Senator Rick Santorum and Mark Meckler, folks. Senator Santorum, I'm going to stick with you for this one because you took me right where I wanted to go. This idea of Republicans having ideas, it went out the door with Speaker Newt Gingrich. Our brainiacs, if you will, those who were thinking, are disgraced and denigrated inside the U.S. Congress by the likes of the aforementioned Mitch McConnell. Those who have ideas, they're shot down long before the press or the Democrats get a hold of it by these go along to get along Republicans who are in constant surrender caucus mode. And our thought leaders are not being supported. They're not being encouraged to take leadership positions inside the United States Congress. We're relegated to the likes of McConnell and McCarthy and Liz Cheney and Adam Crying Kinzinger, who have the only thing they know how to do, as you said, is to try to staunch the bleeding from the cancer that is the Socialist Democrat Party. And we need idea guys. And I think that's what Convention of States could foster could maybe give a genesis and why there's so much fear from the left that all of a sudden the thinking conservative, the thinking Republican could become in vogue again, scholarly in fact.
I couldn't agree more. I was part of that 1994 revolution. I called myself a Newtonian. One of Newt's pals. I was in the House in 1994. I ran for the Senate that year. And I ran on the contract with America. I actually helped draft the welfare reform provision in the contract with America. And they were ideas, and they were ideas that were substantive. They were from the American public. I mean, we went out and talked to people and tried to understand what their big concerns are about government. And we had an agenda to put forward. But you're right. If you look at folks like Mitch McConnell, I served with him for 12 years. He never wanted to run on any ideas. It was always running against the other side. It was never running for anything. You see it. You even see it now. I mean, where he's saying, on the abortion issue, no, we shouldn't be for anything. We should just run against them. And that's sort of been this knee-jerk reaction from Republicans, which is to just thwart the left in moving this country down the road to socialism without trying to provide a way for us to move our country back toward individual liberties and personal responsibility.
You know what, Mark? And on that vein, I had a conversation with back during Obamacare with Congressman Michael Burgess, who was pulling his hair out at the time that the Republicans, because of the likes of Mitch McConnell, would not commit to a free market alternative to the socialism that was Obamacare. They just said, we don't like Obamacare. But they wouldn't come up with their own ideas to make Americans' lives better. And I think that surrender caucus, staunching the bleeding type Republican has got to join the ranks of the dinosaurs. What about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. When I look at the two parties, what I see in the Democrat Party, nothing that I like, but I would say something to admire, which is the sense that when they run for office, when they get control, they exercise the power that's available to them. Unfortunately, now I would say beyond the bounds of the law, but at least to the bounds of the law, they exercise that power to enact their vision and to impose that on America. And what tends to happen with Republicans, in my experience, is they are trying to get elected so that they can get in office, and then their entire goal is just to maintain power. I heard a story during the Obamacare fight, and Pete Hegseth is a great friend of our organization on Fox and Friends weekends. And early on in his career at Fox, he was sitting there with Juan Williams, and this is during the fight over Obamacare, and they're trying to ram Obamacare down our throats. And he said to Juan, look, I don't understand. If you guys do this, you're going to lose the House. And Juan said, yes, we are. And he said, you don't care? And he said, no, because we're going to impose this on the country, and you guys will never repeal it, and eventually we'll win back the House. Well, look who won the day. The people who had the big idea and were willing to fight for their ideas. And we still have Obamacare today. He was correct. So Republicans have got to have the big ideas and be willing to use their power to push them through.
Well, what a great way to end a segment. And one of the biggest ideas, perhaps in my lifetime, if Convention of States action can push it over the finish line, is paying attention to that Constitution and making sure that there are amendments made to it to make it better and not weaken it so that we can recapture the greatness of America. Rick Santorum, former Senator, Mark Meckler, the president of Convention of States Foundation and Convention of States Action. Gentlemen, appreciate your efforts. Keep us posted.
Thank you. And all your listeners, you got to go on cosaction.com and learn about this, sign up, and get involved in trying to restore America.
And I got to say, that's a worthwhile goal right there. Restore America by restoring the protections for we the people in the United States Constitution, by dialing back the oppression that government has confiscated for itself, I believe, illegally and unconstitutionally all these years since the first passage of the Constitution. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for this edition of the Salcedo Storm podcast. Hope you learned something.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks were willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.